What's going on, guys? It's Coach Gaglione here. We got another edition of the Powerlifting for the People podcast. I'm your host, and we got another interview today with the lovely Tee Fab. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent. So she's the queen of curls, and we're going to kind of get into that in a second. But before we do, can you just tell the listeners a little bit about your background, kind of just how you got into lifting and what you got going on right now?
Sure. So I consider myself a power builder because I power lift and bodybuild. I got started on my fitness journey shortly after having my daughter in 2013. Around that time, I was about 215 pounds. So I started off just wanting to lose weight and to get fit. So I started off in CrossFit. So I always like to give credit to CrossFit because that was kind of the foundation of everything that I do. It taught me a lot of skills that cross over even into curling and to powerlifting and bodybuilding. After I CrossFitted for some years, I used to compete and do things like that in the CrossFit world. But I wasn't really losing weight and I didn't really look like how I was training. So I decided to go a little further into learning about nutrition and weight loss. And I ended up finding myself doing like a local bikini contest. And once I lost a lot of weight, I lost about 75 pounds. And I, saw all this beautiful muscle. So CrossFit was putting on muscle. I just had a whole lot of fluff. So at that time, I decided to try my hand in natural bodybuilding. So I ended up going into my first OCB show here in my hometown, and I won my pro card right out the gate. And I was like, let's keep the ball rolling. Let's keep setting new goals. So I decided to do my first powerlifting meet because I always knew I was strong. I always had a great deadlift. Even in CrossFit, I always out deadlift even the men in the gym. So I did my first powerlifting meet and set world records. And it's been like lightning speed ever since. So I've been competing pro in both powerlifting and in bodybuilding. And I'm, walking into probably my 8th year. So I'm excited. And that's how I got my start, just from CrossFit and wanting to lose weight.
Did you have any like athletic backgrounds just as like a high school athlete or anything, or just kind of or anything like
Yeah,
that?
for sure. So like most of the great athletes, I have a track background. I was running since I could walk. So I ran all throughout school, even into college. So I have a track background. I've always been an athlete, always been very competitive since my first field day in kindergarten.
And what events did you do for in track?
I did all the sprints and some middle distance. So I did 100, 200, 400, 4x4, 4x1, indoor, outdoor. Didn't do cross country. It was a little too much for me, but I would train with the cross country team just for conditioning, but I never competed.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's always interesting just to kind of hear, like, some people like have a background, some people don't. Obviously, like, I think there's a lot of just benefit to just that sprinting background, especially like having that, like, because not everyone has that, like, kind of that power gear. So
Right.
that came in handy. So what kind of, I just want to kind of rewind a little bit because I know you had a lot going on. So you kind of mentioned that you were much heavier. I know, like, I think you usually compete like in the 148 class, if I'm not mistaken, or so.
Yes.
So how did you go from being, a track athlete to, being like overweight? Like what kind of, like, cause that was kind of the one piece that I was kind of, missing a little bit, where you just, what kind of spawned that? Anything in particular, or did you just stop
For
being
sure.
active a
So
bit?
when I got to college, my father was diagnosed with diabetes back in 1980, the year I was born. So when I got to college, my sophomore year, my father passed away. So at the time, we didn't really talk about mental health. So I didn't really know what I was going through. I thought I was just gaining like the freshman 15, and then that turned into like the sophomore 30. You know how that goes. So I gradually gained weight throughout college. Grieving, I guess I was just grieving, and I stopped being active. I stopped having interest in things, grieving the loss of my father. And then, the weight just piled on. And then, of course, I got married and got pregnant. So then I gained more weight. And I look back at, my daughter was actually diagnosed with heart failure 6 months after having her. So that really kind of woke me up. Because my father was sick all my life. I meant that I wasn't going to be ill and I was going to be around to take care of my daughter. And I didn't want her to have to go through losing a parent like I did. So yeah, at the height, my heaviest weight was about 215 pounds. And I hit that point where I was like, no, we got to get this together because you have to do better. When you know better, you got to do better. So some people repeat the cycle and some people make a decision to change it. And I made a decision to change it.
Yeah. So I guess, would you say even like now is like being strong for your family, like a big motivation for you to kind of keep going and keep pushing these records up? Like, Because I know.
Absolutely. So with me, I stay motivated to stay on track by just setting new goals. And then I just want to leave like a legacy. So for me, every time I win something like today is an opportunity for me to tell my story. And when I tell my story, it's not with the intention of I'm so great. It's the intention to inspire somebody else because I went through a whole lot. So to give that a purpose, I go and I compete. And then when somebody asks me, how did I do it? I tell the whole story. And so, just if I would have never had my daughter, she never would have went through her heart. She ended up getting a heart transplant in 2019. If she never would have been diagnosed and things like that, it wouldn't have led me to do the things that I'm doing today. So in my mind and in my heart, I feel like they all kind of go together. That was my purpose. I had her to lead me to my purpose. So I can't just talk about the wins and the records and not talk about what the root of that is. And the root of that is just to encourage somebody that if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah, I think sometimes with parents, it could be like a double-edged sword. I know there's like one camp where it's like, oh, I just got to focus on my kids. I don't have time for me. What I always try to tell people too, and I heard, one of my old business coaches, use the analogy like when the plane's going down, you got to put like your mask on first. That's kind of like the advice people give. And I think if you're not strong, if you're not fit, if you're not healthy, so especially for like parents or moms that maybe are like, they feel like they're really busy and they just don't have a lot of time for themselves. Like what advice would you give someone that's kind of in their situation that maybe feels like they're really strapped for time. They're really busy. They're not sure if they really, or they may feel like a little selfish if they go to the gym or they take some time to, pursue their own passions, their own, hobbies.
So it's definitely not selfish. Being a parent is stressful. It's being a caregiver in general. Like for me, it's I'm a parent of a child with unique and special needs, medically complex. So for me, I have to have an outlet to keep my mental health together because as parents, we always have this fear in the back of our mind. We always want to protect our child. We always want to make sure we can, shield them. But reality is there's some things that they might encounter that we can't protect them from. Also as us adults, we have a lot of trauma. We have a lot of layers of things that we might have been through. We might not have had the best parents. We might not have had the best upbringing where moms and dads are constantly, wondering and questioning, are we doing our best? So to me, going to work out and a fitness journey is a good outlet to balance that mental health. It's a good stress relief. And it's something positive that you can do that sets a good example for the little ones that are watching you. Sometimes we don't realize that our kids sponge on what we do, not what we say. So like even with my daughter, she'll go into my home gym and get on the cardio machine, and I never encouraged her or told her to do that. It's just what she sees. So sometimes, even when you think it's a selfish act, you're putting seeds in your child that are invaluable. So don't look at it like it's a selfish thing because it's definitely not. It's something that'll preserve not only you, but the children and the people in your household watching you.
Yeah, I think we often forget sometimes like how, just people in general, but certainly children can like learn just by like observing. And I think that if you set the example and then they're going to like kind of learn, from that. So I think
For
that's
sure.
really a great point. So you kind of got into CrossFit, you kind of realized that like you couldn't just, only exercise, right? So um, when you started to transition to these other strength sports, because obviously it seems like you did a lot, was there anything in particular? Because I know like now you've done a couple of different powerlifting, you got the curls, you got the bodybuilding. Um, I guess, was there anything in particular that you just maybe weren't seeing the results in your body that you started to kind of venture out? Or did you feel like maybe, I know you mentioned that you were really strong, you were strong at some of the barbell lifts. So did you kind of feel like maybe you could excel in different areas? So like what was, I guess, I guess if there was a defining moment or maybe just, or anything that kind of caused you to kind of, try a different route and kind of focus more on strength and bodybuilding and go a different direction?
There was definitely a defining moment. That's a great question. Like I remember having, CrossFit is very rigorous. You are beating that body up, and I remember having an epiphany where I was like, I am hitting the gym 6 days a week. I am always sore. I have bar burn, I have box scrapes, on my shins. And so I was like, but I don't even look like I work out. And so I remember having that epiphany where I was like, for all of the work, because I had been doing it for years at this point. And I was like, for all of the money that I'm spending on training, for all of the time, blood, literally, sweat and tears, I want to look like I work out. I want to look like what I do. And so that was the epiphany for me where I was like, something is not right. I need a little bit more. And so that's when I had to learn about nutrition, because at that time, nobody was talking about nutrition. It just was like ROM wad and stretch and, wad of the day and beat the clock, beat the clock, beat the clock. But nobody was talking about nutrition. And that was a missing element for me. And it was key because I actually didn't feel as good internally until I cleaned up my nutrition. So once I learned that the rest of those tools that went along with that, it was a game changer for me.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm not sure how much you know about my past, or whatever, but I was very overweight. I was 340 pounds. Um,
Nice.
I was a super heavyweight powerlifter for a while. And, one of the things that I kind of try to tell people, you could be putting a lot of effort in one area, but if you're not like, it's not just about like working hard, like you need to like have focused efforts. And, so if you're kind of missing your sleep or nutrition, or you're too stressed, you mentioned before, it could be very stressful being a parent. So if all those kind of other areas are not, maybe the training is great and maybe you're like really pushing hard in the gym, but then you're neglecting like these other areas, maybe you're not doing.
Right.
And I think especially in like the powerlifting world, sometimes we kind of also, we kind of take nutrition for granted. We take, cardio for granted. We take stress management for granted. And
100%.
so, yeah, I think that's really a great point that you start to kind of, and then you start to realize, okay, now my efforts are in like the right spot. You start seeing the results. So you're kind of bouncing back and forth between a couple of sports. I wanted to especially kind of like maybe highlight, I'm not sure, I guess, did you do a couple of powerlift as far as what was the timeline between, I guess you did bodybuilding first, and then what was the timeline between starting to do powerlifting and then eventually, you kind of stumbled across, doing strict curl. So what was that like transition like for you?
So it was within months. Once I finished my show, I knew I needed to grow. So you can kind of figure this out as well. Once you go from being overweight and then you lose weight, you look great. You look the best you've ever looked, but it's still a lot of work to do. You got rid of the fat, but you kind of build that muscle back up. So with me, especially because I won my pro card right out the gate, for me to keep competing, I would be on stage with women who might have been competing pro for years. So in the back of my mind, I got the feedback from the judges and I knew that I had to grow. If I wanted to continue to do this, in which I fell in love with the sport, if I wanted to continue to do it, and my intention is always to be the best and be my best, I knew I had to continue to lift and grow and catch up to these women. There was certain areas or certain muscle groups or parts of my symmetry that was underdeveloped. I looked great. My conditioning was top notch because, of course, I came from CrossFit, so that's why I said that tool never went anywhere and it helped. But I knew I had to grow. So with me, once I set a goal and I accomplished that goal, I kind of immediately set another one. So I was like, you know what? I can't sit down and because again, I had been used to yo-yoing weight. You know how it goes. You would lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, gain weight. And I meant this time after losing 75 pounds, I was not going to return back to that old girl. So I set another goal and I said, okay, well, I have to grow. I have to keep lifting. I need muscle. So let me go ahead and try my hand at powerlifting. Everybody says I'm real strong. So within the next 3 months post show, by the time I rebounded, and my strength got back to 100, I went right on into doing full power and just crushed it.
Love it. There's like so many, I want to try to like stay focused because there's a couple of different ways I want to take this. So before we get into more of the strength stuff, and because I definitely want to spend a good portion talking about strict curl just because it's so unique, but I think this is really important for people to hear. So especially like for women, but for men too. And I'm still working on this myself because when you went from doing bodybuilding, so you're at your leanest, and now you're kind of focused on strength. I know like for me, it could be really easy to like let my weight kind of climb too fast. But at the same time, I know there's probably some people that are just so scared to put on like any weight on the scale. So, is there like a rate of a rate of gain that you like to see, or are there certain kind of barometers to kind of keep you in check where you're not gaining too quickly? Because I think for some people, especially that have been very overweight, could be very mentally challenging to see that scale go up, and then they're not sure, like, are they going to, like, just all of a sudden balloon back to where they were. I think it's a very psychologically tough process, but at some point, like you said, you have to, if you want to kind of improve your physique, the scale will have to, you can't just perpetually just keep going down. Right. So how do you kind of, do you have anything that helped you in particular, or is there any kind of like things to like watch out for when you're kind of, you finished your diet and now we kind of are starting to kind of go back up? What are some things? Cause I know, like, even when I did a bodybuilding show in 2020, and that was very tough to come out of the diet. That was something I kind of definitely want to do better job next time I kind of get lean like that again. Any advice for someone that's kind of coming out of their diet for the first time?
So that's an excellent question. And I've done a lot of interviews and nobody's asked me that before. So powerlifting actually was my barometer. So I'm going to tell you how they relate, because I compete in 148. And I always said and say, even now, I am never going to sacrifice my aesthetic for a PR. I know that that's not common in powerlifting, which is why I always classify myself as a power builder, because the unspoken rule in powerlifting is bigger, stronger. I always said I never wanted to sacrifice my hard work, my weight loss, and my aesthetic for a PR. Whatever I can do at a pleasing weight, an aesthetic, a symmetry that crosses over into bodybuilding is what I'm happy with. I'm pretty sure if I put on 40 pounds, my deadlift would go up even higher, but maybe not, because I actually lift better when I'm leaner. I'm one of those anomalies. But most people would think, gain weight, you can pull more weight. And some people will say that mentally or verbally and say, oh, I just gained weight so I can PR. We know that that's not necessarily the truth. The diet was probably trash, and that's their cover. I'm very, real. With me, my barometer was 148. I knew that anything over that was going to be too much weight. It was going to kind of throw me out of my parameters post-show, and it would be hard for me to cut, or take a while for me to cut to hit the stage again. So my first season, why I got into powerlifting is because I wanted to have that barometer. In my mind, I knew that I was competing in 148. I knew I had to set that bar, like, okay, you'll be able to cut maybe 5 to 7 pounds, but don't go too crazy. Now, did I keep that? I will be honest. The more I competed pro and the more my seasons racked up, I definitely had to put on more weight, but it looked differently, But when you first lose weight and your body is recomping, you got to be careful with that. Now, because my body is more, I went through recomp several bodybuilding seasons. I was able to get to 170 in my off season, and I still look like I was 150 because it looks different. So again, I never was willing to sacrifice the aesthetic for a PR. And then I tried to, just definitely keep an eye on my symmetry, because at the end of the day, both sports need to cross over.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I know, like, for me, I try to, I'm not always perfect, but I think it's good to, like, kind of have, like, maybe like a window of, a certain percentage of your weight or a certain amount of weight. And then I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but what are you I know it's different every time, but typically, like, what do you like weigh on stage, if you had to kind of guess, like, just as like a.
It actually goes down a little bit every season, as you know, because you have more muscle than everything else. My last stage weight was 124. 2 years ago was 125. So I normally am on stage about mid 120s. Now, when I go again, I think I need to be about 122, 123. I need a little more leanness. But yeah, so my bodybuilding weight is about the mid 120s, and my competition weight is usually around 150-ish real weight, but you know how that goes. You pull a little bit water, you make weight, you know what I mean? Yeah. This season, actually, next season, 2024, I actually want to come in a lot leaner. So we're going to see how that goes.
And obviously you're at a higher level. So just to kind of give people like an idea, like, obviously, like, you're that body weight for like a moment, right? And then, like, obviously, like, you're not like kind of, it's not like a realistic number to maintain like year round. Cause I think sometimes people think like you just look like that all the time. And I think that's kind of a mistake too. But at the same time, it's not like you're going from, 180, 190 to, 120, 130. So there's a tighter window. So I think that's kind of good. And obviously, if you're a male, some really big, super heavyweight bodybuilders, that might be a bigger window than a,
yeah,
female. So it's just kind of good for people. And I think, again, if you're looking at, you got to be honest with yourself. Like, am I getting a little bit too fluffy? Am I need to, do I need to kind of, rein it in? It's important. And I think that, I know, like for me too, like, because I did compete as a super heavyweight, don't compare if you have like your records in 148 and so on and so forth, like just, okay, these are the records at this body weight in this weight class. And I think that's kind of a good way to go about it. And that if you're getting stronger in that weight class, you're on to something, and most likely you're going to be building muscle. So,
Right.
so you did some powerlifting, and then now I know, you're doing really well. You got some, a lot of world records in strict curl. So when did you do your first strict curl meet, and how did you kind of like find out about it, and what like intrigued you to give that a try?
So I actually did strict curl at my first meet in 2018. I didn't know what it was, but I was just so excited to lift. I was like, I just want to be in every event. Um, Strict curl is the lift that I'm kind of trending right now, but my original lift was deadlift. That's where I first got my world records in. So at the first meet I did it. My coach at the time hated strict curl. And I remember I kept telling him, I want to sign up for strict curl. I want to sign up. He's so old school. Shout out to Robert Games. He's so old school. So he was like, oh, I hate that lift. That's not a real lift. And I'm like, well, it is a real lift. I want to do it. And he just would not train me in it. He knew nothing about it. So he really couldn't train because he didn't know how. But maybe like 2 days, when we tested our opener, he was like, okay, pick the bar up and let's just see how high you go, and I think I got to like 80 something pounds. We didn't know what we were doing. I just knew I could do 80 something pounds. So when I got to the first meet, I was like, yeah, gonna want to open with 80. Now then, a girl my size wasn't even curling 80. So when I said I wanted to open with 80, they were like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. In my mind, I had a point of reference. I curled 80 on a straight bar in the, gym on the military base. So I actually watched everybody else in front of me, copied what they did, and I curled 82, 83 pounds on the first go out. And they said that was a world record for submaster. So I was like, okay. And then I still didn't have time to train it. A full power block is strenuous.
Yes.
So I still didn't have time to add another, lift to it. So the next time I came and did the world championships a year later, I still hadn't trained it, but I curled again and I kind of won. And I was like, okay. And so I remember doing a interview about strict curl, and it kind of blew my mind because they asked me to do an interview and they were talking about how great I was in it. And I knew I hadn't been training it. Right. And so I was like, well, I'm going to be honest with y'all. I've never really trained it. And, Russo was like, what? You've never tried? I was like, no, my coach doesn't like it. So I just go there and do what everybody else does. And I mean, when I tell you the feedback was crazy, they were like, she doesn't even train it. I really only did it when I got to the meet. So that's kind of when I knew I was kind of good at it. So once I started training it, the curl went from 80 to 100 some pounds and now, 122. So yeah, it was my first meet. I just didn't know what I was doing. So I was just winging it for a couple of years.
Yeah, well, I think a takeaway is like sometimes you don't know until you try. So like you might
Right.
have a skill, you might have a propensity for a certain lift. I don't know, like I guess you started. So I did my first contest in 2006. And there just wasn't as much like out there like on the internet and stuff. There was a little bit of YouTube and things like that. We had Powerlifting USA. I had like Westside Barbell VHS tapes that I was learning from. It was just a different world. So I know like it's good and bad. I think interviews like this are important because it provides more context for people. You're not just
Mm-hmm.
you're not just seeing like, oh my God, Tee Fab curled 122 or they don't see like all the buildup like to it. They don't see all the training. And you had a lot of training experience, even though maybe you weren't practicing that lift.
Right.
I think sometimes having just a general like base of you were an athlete, you did all this stuff, so it's not like you just like kind of plopped off the
Show up.
couch and so I think a lot of people kind of, so I know there's some people that get inspired by it, and there's some people like, oh, I could never do that. So I think give it a try, see if you like it. I think that's
Yep.
a really big thing. So after I guess your first couple of times, like when did you start to take the curl a little bit more seriously, and then like how did that kind of change as far as like your training? Was there anything that you kind of, because now you're like, okay, I'm pretty good at this. Obviously you start to tinker, like, so what was your, I guess, your difference in your mental approach when you actually started to take it a little bit more seriously and plan out a cycle like you would for a powerlifting meet?
So I knew I needed to take a couple of years off season from bodybuilding. And I just decided to, I had to ask myself, am I really giving 100% to this lift? And also, I was noticing that I wasn't really seeing, and this is all across the board, I wasn't really seeing a lot of people that look like me in the spaces that I operate in. And I know we'll probably circle back to this at the end because it is a closing point. But when I got into strength sports and even in bodybuilding in some areas, as far as like judging and promoting, I didn't see a lot of people that look like me. I didn't see a lot of women. I didn't see a lot of minority women. So one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of take it more seriously is because I didn't see a lot of women lifting heavy in the lift. The difference, like, so when I first started training or curling, like I said, even when I gave them my opener for somebody to say 80 pounds, everybody's like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. So it was such a difference between what I was curling and what the number two was curling that I was like, okay, well, this is possible. And I'm a lifetime natural athlete. I was being tested every time I walked through the doors, like, hi, here's your cup. So it was like I had to take the lift seriously and start training it so that people can understand that it is a possibility that a woman can do this. I remember hearing somebody telling me that a woman's never curled 100 pounds. So the first time I hit 100 pounds in training, I was like, oh, wow, I'm really onto something. So, yeah, I just wanted to prove that women can do it too. And we could do it, well, and it's not going to make us bulky or manly. It's actually a beautiful lift if you take the time and train it, and it's fun. And so I just wanted women to operate in that space and show that we can do that too.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one thing I want to highlight too that we kind of glossed over a little bit, but I think it's an important point. You mentioned that sometimes a full power prep, squat, benching, and deadlifting is, it is. And now is it as strenuous as a bodybuilding prep? Is it as strenuous as? So I think powerlifting, one of the things why I'm an advocate for the sport, just for even general people, I do think that you can get some great results in a fairly short amount of time commitment. But I think something also like a strict curl meet where you're only doing one lift, I think is a really nice starting point for a lot of people. And also if you are like in a busy season of your life or whatever, so like I'm getting married next year, so I'm just going to kind of jump in and do it. Also, I'm coaching athletes, so I want to kind of like understand what they're going through. Cause kind of like your coach, like I'm kind of like just figuring it out. Like I'm kind of going by the fly. I'm kind of taking my knowledge of powerlifting and applying it to this new strength sport. And I kind of hope it works. And so far it's been good, but I figured, let me jump in and try to learn what they're doing. But I do find that you don't need as much of a time commitment. Like I know, like I was a really, big squatter, especially when I was bigger. Sometimes you need like 5 guys to spot you so you don't like die. So I think in terms of like the barrier of entry, I think strict curl is great. So I don't know if you want to kind of talk about like, as far as I guess, the time commitment or like maybe like how you kind of set up your training a little bit. Cause I think sometimes people, they see like bodybuilding is kind of like a 24/7 kind of deal. And you still should take your nutrition seriously. But I think something like a deadlift only meet or a strict curl meet can be like a nice kind of intro because there is like a lower kind of barrier of entry in terms of time, in terms of like, you still need to put a lot of effort into it, but it's just, like I said, it's a lot less strenuous. So I don't know if you want to touch on like the difference in as far as whether it be mental energy, physical stress of like, training for a curl meet versus maybe some of the other, strength sports that you've done.
Sure. So, like everybody kind of entering the curl, there's really not a lot of information out there. So a lot of the things that I have developed and that I learned and that even I coach other athletes, I kind of had to figure out on my own. Um, I don't believe that there are coincidences in life. So I feel like everything that I did kind of led up to this. So I incorporated my education from CrossFit. I incorporated some of my track stuff. I incorporated my powerlifting things. The first thing I want people to understand, if you're doing it right, curling is a full body lift. It is a full body lift. So if it's a full body lift, then that means you're not just training your scapula, you're not just training your upper body. You have to train your full body. I say this all the time. After I do a curl meet, the muscle group that is the most sore is my glutes and hamstrings. It's not my arms. It's not my bicep triceps. It's my glutes and hamstrings. Okay. I train it the same way. I say the most similar compound lift to how I train curl is how I would train squat. My brace is almost the same. My explosion is almost the same coming out of the hole. So again, if you're training curl and you're not thinking about it as a full body lift, you're not getting the most out of it and you're not doing it right. You have to incorporate everything you have to explode, to get that curl bar up, to get through the sticking point, to lock out. It takes everything. I've seen some of my brothers in iron pass out from curling. So clearly it's a full body lift. You're using everything you have. So, you have to develop a split and train the muscle groups accordingly. Yes, they're primary movers in the lift. Of course there are. And then there's some secondary. So the primaries get the brunt of your training, but you can't neglect the lower body. You can't neglect teaching yourself how to brace, how to hold that air, how to explode, how to come through the sticking point, how to shift the energy from bicep to tricep. You know how to clench the glutes just like you would coming out the hole on a squat, So it's very technical. And like I said, it's a lot of things that I kind of just discovered on my own, just training and just paying attention to what my body was doing. And then I just developed ways to train the mechanics in the lift. So again, it is full body. It's not as strenuous as an SBD block for sure, but you still need to make sure that you're observant of what muscle groups that you're using and recruiting, make sure they're the right ones, and then train those to be stronger. Once you isolate those muscle groups and train them and condition them, then the curl goes up.
Cool. And then just kind of personal question, you could kind of be as in-depth or, as general as you want. Just when you're getting ready for a contest, like, I guess, you don't need to go over like every little detail, but like how many days a week are you kind of training like the curl specifically? Any particular exercises that you found have really been helpful as far as improving your curl besides like the competition lift itself?
So I do a heavy day and a moderate day. So I do a split. So my split is SBDC.
Nice.
That's what I call it. I'm actually about to start a new training block next week,
Okay, I
SBDC.
love it. SBDC.
So I still train the compounds, year round. I don't stop training the compounds year round. I just don't train them as rigorous if I'm not getting ready for a meet. But I do have a heavy curl day and then a moderate day. On the moderate day, I do just my warm up and then a couple of heavy sets. And then I work like the accessory lifts and things like that. On my heavy day, I make sure I go through full warm up and then I hit the percentages like I would a normal block. I do a lot of dumbbell work, a lot of preacher curl work, a lot of band curls. I bang, bang, bang my triceps because the triceps is going to be like the gas. I bang the triceps. And then like I think all the other compounds help me with the brace, help me with the explosion, like especially my deadlift. I feel like right now I feel my lower back from this last meet because I'm a lot leaner. But I do have a strong back because I continue to deadlift. My hams and glutes get that training, get that secondary training and the curl from deadlifting and the squat and things like that. So it all kind of ties in together. And I think that was pretty much the history. You remember if you realize that the curl was an original power lift and they all kind of tie in together. It's just you're isolating one muscle group per lift, and that's the primary, and everything else moves to secondary. So yeah, that's usually my block. I keep the full power training all year round. It's just not as rigorous if I'm not doing a full power meet. But I think all the other compounds help the curl get stronger, training them as well.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I kind of was chatting with John Cooper, and he kind of said, it's like, yeah, my deadlifts, my bench are kind of use them as like curl accessories. And
yep,
kind of
sure.
So, yeah, and I think that you said, I think you just got to like shift your priority. If you're going to do a curl meet, then obviously like your bench, squat, and deadlift, maybe just don't train as intensely. And obviously, if you're doing a powerlifting meet, then maybe you got to kind of back off on the heavy curls for a bit. But I do think, and I'm not sure. I know you just did like the meet in New York. If you want to kind of chat about that for a little bit. So like obviously there's some differences in the bars. Have you found that one bar over the other is a little bit easier to recover from, or the technique's a little bit different? Or I guess what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to thank Wyatt and Alistair. They put on a historic event. So the meet that I just came from in Syracuse at the Strength Warehouse was a collaboration between CT Fletcher's ISCA, which was pretty much the original Strict Curl Federation, and and I no shade to any other federations, but he's kind of the godfather of strict curl. We all know strict curl from CT Fletcher, so that's why I always give respect to whom respect is due. And then it was a collab between that and Strict Curl Nation, which is a newer federation that has came about, which I'm affiliated with both, and I hold the top lifts in both. So it was historic because those federations kind of combined. The difference is with CT's organization, he uses the original OBZ bar. So the OBZ bar is the bar that the strict curl has been using since the inception. And the Strict Curl Nation uses the Gopher bar. They both weigh about 30. Actually, the Gopher bar is a little bit lighter at 25, and the OBZ is 30 pounds. The biggest difference between the two is the aerodynamics, the whip in the bar. The OBZ bar, which was the original bar, is very hard on the joints, especially the forearms. So when I am getting ready for a OBZ exclusive meet, for example, when I train for CT Fletcher's meet, I only train on that bar 1 day a week because it is hard on the joints.
Yeah.
Before I discovered that, I would train because, you know, these federations just changed to the Gopher. So before it was just the OBZ. And I noticed that I couldn't train curl twice a week. It took at least 3 days for my forearms to recover. They were constantly feeling like I had, like, if you ever imagine like a shin splint in my forearm. So that's actually why a lot of people stepped away from the curl, men and women, and why the lift kind of died down, because a lot of the lifters were getting injured and they couldn't really compete in the other lifts because the curl was kind of injuring the arms a little bit, the recovery. And then especially women kind of stayed away from it because, you know, it was so hard on the joints. They figured it's a man's lift. When the Gopher came around, I noticed that you can train on it a little more frequently. It's less harder on the joints. The Gopher, the aerodynamics of the Gopher allows for a lot of whip. So that's why you can kind of get the bar up faster and you can curl a little heavier. I always say the difference between the OBZ and the Gopher is about 7 to 8 pounds in difference. So generally, whatever you can do on the OBZ, you can do about 7 to 8 pounds more on the Gopher, just because of the whip that you can get up under the bar a little bit better. The way you grip the bar is a little bit easier on the forearms and the wrist. So there's a big difference. CT Fletcher's organization, again, they like the old school strict rules. So head back, butt back, and back on the pad. Strict Curl Nation, they allow the head to come up. So not only are the bars different, there's a little bit difference in form. So the meet that I came from in Syracuse allowed both federations to kind of collab together, and the registrants or the lifters in the meet can choose which way they wanted, which bar they wanted, which federation they wanted. It also was historic because for the first time, they gave away $1,000 to the heaviest lift. If you're talking about strict curl and giving away $1,000 to the heaviest lift, that's a lot of money. Now, I can compete pro as a bodybuilder. I have plenty of friends that are even IFBB pros that go and win a show and don't win that type of money. So it was historic because it was the highest curl payout. And it was historic because it was the first time those federations have collabed. I feel good about it because I did win the female overall. I took away the $1,000 and was the first pro curl female champion. So it just gives us more opportunities and more options. And so why I think that meet was so important is because a lot of people don't get into curl or are hesitant or reluctant because they're looking for options. You know, you have some people that prefer the OBZ. You have some people that prefer the Gopher. Some people like the head back. Some people don't. So it's all about providing options for the lifters. And it's also about rewarding the lifters. So it was a beautiful meet. Like I said, I did take away the overall. And I just want to thank CT Fletcher, Strict Curl Nation, Wyatt, and Alistair for giving me that opportunity.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to kind of see like where the sport grows. Like I said, we're trying to provide some opportunities because obviously, like, thing with powerlifting, if you've been around, you know, there's so many more opportunities to compete in powerlifting. I mean, you could like pick a weekend and you could probably find a meet within driving distance. Strict curl, not so much. 100% raw, I think, is doing a really good job, but I do think it's still primarily like, you know, kind of the mid-Atlantic, kind of East Coast area. It's not as much. I know California, they're trying to do a little bit more out there. And obviously CT's always had his meet. I think usually I think in May, but I could be wrong. You might know better than me. I know he's usually had his, I think, world championship meet, usually in May. But yeah, before that, there wasn't. It was kind of 100% Raw was kind of doing their thing on the East Coast. I know CT was doing his thing on the West Coast. But yeah, if you maybe had a couple of opportunities per year, certainly not every single weekend like you can for like powerlifting. So one of the things I'm trying to do is just get more people involved. So also not just athletes, but we need more judges, referees, scoring. One of the things you mentioned kind of Coach Russo. It's like he's like judging like every flight and stuff. So it's great, and they're doing a great job. But we definitely would like to see more people, just get involved, because I think it is important. I think it's a good outlet for people. If someone was maybe like on the fence of maybe whether it be curling or just strength sports in general, like what advice would you give to someone who's just getting started and they're not really sure like where to start?
So I definitely would advise you to give it a try. I coach as well, so I have a team of athletes, and a lot of them used to power lift, and for one reason or another, they have an injury that they're prone to, or just get a little bit older, or their body's not set up like it used to be. I have some athletes that aren't ready for full power, but they want to get active, or just don't want to do full power, but want to have an experience of powerlifting without making that kind of commitment. So I'd say give it a try. Like, it's a beautiful lift. You'll fall in love with the sport. It's a great community. And you never know, like with me, I would have never discovered, the talent that I have if I hadn't just gave it a shot. I know my coach at the time definitely was like, nah, you don't need to do that. Just focus on the deadlift, and basically was saying I would kind of risk injury. Like, people would hurt themselves doing that lift, you're going to hurt yourself and then blow your deadlift, because that was my moneymaker at the time. But look at me today. So I would have never, ever, ever discovered that if I hadn't just taken a chance. So I would say never put off for tomorrow what you can do today. Just try it, see how you like it. Sign up for a meet, contact people. If you don't know, ask. Everybody's always willing to help. There's plenty of people in the sport that's willing to help. DM me if you need to. But we're definitely trying to work together. I actually have a meet myself that I do in June. You have your meet coming up. So we're working together to try to grow the sport and to give these athletes opportunities. So when you see a meet coming, sign up. Also want to point out that, as you were saying, there are not a lot of meets around. The street curl community goes hard, and that's why I always like to shout out the street curl community. When you see curlers show up to a meet, they didn't come from 5 minutes up the street. It just doesn't work like that. These athletes, like when I had my meet at the Chaos Lab, which is where I train in Richmond, I would say 95% of my athletes were from out of state. I probably had 5% that lived in my hometown. And so I remember talking to my owner and my colleague Sean, and I was like, yeah, these athletes don't live here. They're all, coming from out of town. So this needs to be the start time. The curl community goes hard. We're catching flights. We're driving for hours for just 3 lifts. So that's why I always have respect when there's payouts, because we sacrifice a lot to get to these meets. So yeah, we travel, and like I said, feel free to travel. It's a great community. You'll meet people from all over the world. I've met brothers and sisters in iron from all over the world, all different colors, creeds, races, backgrounds. And, I love it. I love meeting new people. I love just making new friends. So it's a wonderful community to be a part of. So try it, see how you like it. I guarantee you'll fall in love.
Yeah, 2 things I want to highlight, because we didn't really, I know we kind of brushed over it, but kind of the injury factor. And I think like, I don't want to, I think it's good to have options, like you said. So I think the way I kind of look at the Gopher Bar and the OBZ, it's very similar to, not exactly the same, but similar to the conversation, like, oh, like, should you use a stiff bar for deadlift? Should you use a deadlift bar for deadlift? And then so I think that like some of the advancements in the bars can help make the athletes kind of extend their career a little bit, have a little bit more longevity, train with a little bit more frequency. So if you are someone, because I was kind of a little bit skeptical at first when I started coaching some of these athletes, but I definitely have found with the Gopher Bar especially that it's very safe, and people seem to like, they could tolerate it much better. Because when we were first starting tinkering with the lift, and we were just using a regular, like, just easy bar you find at the commercial gym, it's just a completely different feel in terms of how you get beat up and stuff. And then like kind of going to the Gopher Bar was definitely game changing. And there's more technical. I think, like you said, you got to like kind of be ready to ride that whip and kind of get the timing down. So there are technical, like you said, it's a full body lift. It's not just a basic arm curl. So, and then the other thing too, I think the community aspect is huge. So yeah, even if maybe you have an injury that prevents you from doing something else, it's just another option, I think. So definitely give the strict curl a try. And we're going to be hosting a meet in Delaware on January 13th, which will be like a last chance qualifier for anyone that's looking to do the Arnold as well in Ohio. So we'll provide some information. And then Tee Fab, where can people find you if they want to follow you or learn more about what you're doing?
So you can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Tee Fab Fit. On Facebook, Tee Fab Fit on everything. So Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. I also have one more point that we missed, and I think it's important. The demographic for strict curl, like the meet that I went to, there was a 4-year-old that was curling.
That's awesome.
And I have been to meets where people are 70 curling. So, I don't care how old or how young you are. The beautiful thing about this lift is you can be a 4-year-old or a 74-year-old and still make great progress and have a great time with this lift. You can't necessarily say that about something like a squat or a deadlift, but with the curl, it's literally for everybody.
Yeah, and I know there's some, and I'm not sure if you have any athletes. I know, at the Mr. America, and I train a couple of powerlifting athletes. So there's some athletes that compete they might be in a wheelchair, they might be, sort of disability. So it just kind of opens up the doors for like a lot more people. And I think they have different like adaptive athlete records. And I think it might be the classification might be different depending on the federation and what those records are. But
right.
There's something for everybody. And that's what powerlifting for the people is all about. So I appreciate you coming on today. I think this was a really helpful episode. We went a little long over time, but I think there's a lot of good information and I appreciate your time. So give Tee Fab a follow. If you guys enjoyed the episode, please give this podcast a 5-star review. It helps other people find us. Please share it if you found it helpful. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, stay strong and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.